Welcome to On Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by CJ Vogel. A live reaction here from the weekly press conference of Steve Sarkisian, brought to you by our friends over at Duck Camp. Not only Steve Sarkisian, CJ, but also Arizona State head coach Kenny Dillingham joining him today for a Peach Bowl press conference. Also listening in was the Peach Bowl president, Gary Stokan. Hey, a couple of news and notes here. Let's start with this. Bevo is a no-go in Atlanta, saying after the coaches had spoken, the Peach Bowl rep Matt Garvey says Bevo will not be able to attend practice or attend the game, of the Peach Bowl. That's the second consecutive game where Bevo not allowed in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. I think that he said that it had to do with the limited amount of space. Now, on to the game itself. Now that we've talked about how sad we are that Bevo's not going to be there, two guys we hope are there for the Longhorns, Cam Williams and Isaiah Bond. Steve Sarkisian gave us an update on their status. CJ, tell us what he said.
Yeah, I'll start with Cam Williams, who left the game against Clemson on Saturday at DKR with a knee injury. Look, Sarkisian said, quote, "It wasn't as serious as we thought," and that's a huge positive for the Longhorns. Of course, Williams attempted to go back into the game, was there for a snap, obviously had to come back out of the game right after that. He underwent an MRI as well, but to Sarkisian's point, it does sound like a positive for the Longhorns that you will see Big 56 back on the field whenever Texas heads back to Atlanta next weekend. Bobby, also Isaiah Bond. Texas did not see number 7 on the offensive side of the ball against Clemson. He said right now they're going to try and sit and wait until after Christmas to get him back. Reevaluate some things there, maybe get him up to speed in practice, but we'll see, kind of just a waiting period for him and what he will be moving forward.
Key subplot in this game brought out by media, CJ, was an interesting discussion around turnovers. Texas leading the country in turnovers, I believe, this year, made with 29. Arizona State, on the flip side, leading the country in least turnovers allowed with 8 or 9, I believe it was. The two coaches both talked heavily about one another and their ability to either hang on to the ball or take away the ball.
Yeah, it was really impressive. Sarkisian mentioned, with as much as Arizona State likes to run the football, they only have 3 fumbles on the season. That's a sign of a team that's well coached. They care about the techniques and the fundamentals of holding onto the rock, especially with Scatterbo. So that's something that Texas is very cognizant of. And Sarkisian also spoke about the quarterback. He says, look, he's well coached, takes care of the football, and he's put in very solid positions, Bobby, to not turn the ball over. Doesn't take many risks down the field vertically, and when he does, those shots are in one-on-one or favorable matchups in which the ball is not often put in harm's way. For Texas, again, the key is going to find ways to create turnovers, because their 29 turnovers are the most created in the SEC this year. If you want to find a way to get a leg up on a team that's had a bye or extra rest, short fields and turnovers will be just that for the Longhorns.
Yeah, Kenny Dillingham saying that one of the reasons why Texas gets so many turnovers, pressure on the quarterback. He said pressure on the quarterback and turnovers go hand in hand. Texas now with 41 sacks on the season, a high in the modern era for Texas, clearly. Another common thread in this discussion that the two coaches had on Monday afternoon, CJ, was the amount of former Texas players now on the Arizona State roster. There are 6 of them in all. Jake Smith, a former wide receiver, Prince Dorba, defensive end, Zach Swanson, a defensive tackle, Xavier Alfred, a former safety, Troy O'Meara, a previous wide receiver, and Jamon Tapp, all at Arizona State right now, former Longhorns. A lot of familiarity to them, and Sark talked a little bit about that with his players this morning.
Yeah, it was funny. There was a bit of a back and forth there. Of course, Sarkisian said that in film review and kind of understanding who Arizona State was, a lot of guys were starting to realize, oh, that was our former teammate that's now at Arizona State. And that happened pretty often, obviously. You mentioned all 6 of the guys that used to be in Austin that are now at Arizona State. A lot of familiarity there. Coach Dillingham actually said, look, it doesn't matter where they're from. If they can compete and they're a competitive player, we want them on our team. It just so happens that a lot of them comes from Texas, which speaks more and more to the program that Sarkisian runs down in Austin. But it is pretty interesting, Bobby. They're 6. I don't know if I've seen something like that at the college level. Sarkisian actually made the similarity to the pro level, where at sometimes you have free agencies depart and you have several familiar faces over there as well at different opponents that you play in a given year, whatever the situation might be. But right now, Texas preparing to play their former players just as they would anybody else. And those guys are certainly looking for a revenge, if you will, from it not working at Texas and now at Arizona State. Pretty interesting, Bobby. I also wanted to mention this because I thought it was a pretty interesting comment from Sarkisian. Of course, playing Arizona State, they just won the Big 12 championship. It's not an easy thing to do, right? Sarkisian mentioned Texas has only done it 4 times in the 27 years that they were in the Big 12 conference. What did you think of Coach Dillingham's comments about, hey, we were the new kids on the block, if you will, and coming out and winning the Big 12? That says a lot about their team, their style, and their competitiveness.
Yeah, I thought that it was interesting because both teams actually are in new conferences and did very, very well in those conferences this year. Texas obviously getting into the SEC championship game. Also, Big 12 in the Arizona State Sun Devils winning that conference, kind of going away, particularly in that championship game of the Big 12. A lot of similarities in those two programs in that way. They kind of took their new conferences by storm a little bit, and that is one thing that's good. I'll add this. He also said that Dillingham also said Arizona State has 60 new faces this year. So they are an entirely different team than they were a year ago. Another thing that I thought was interesting that they talked about, and Steve Sarkisian really mentioned this, was Cam Scadaboo's versatility. He really gave high marks to the Arizona State running back because he made a comparison of him to Mike Allstott, which is hilarious because that's who I compared him to this morning on Coffee and Football. That's who Sark compared him to. He goes, but then I looked further into the tape, and this is a guy that catches the ball well, can make people miss a little bit, has some explosiveness to him. He had really, really high things to say about the young man that carries the load, totes the mail for Arizona State.
Yeah, on top of that, he said, look, I wish I found him out of the portal before Arizona State did. And if that is anything of indication of the respect that he has for Scadaboo, Bobby, that to me is the ultimate sign of Sarkisian saying that is a good football player. You mentioned the comparison to Mike Allstott, but he also said you start looking at his tape whenever he can catch the ball out of the backfield. When he misses or makes people miss in space, it's all about the contact balance of just finding a defender in the hole and brushing them off and continuing to make a big play. That's been a big part of the Arizona State offensive success, but also what's helped make Cam Scadaboo one of the best running backs in all of the country. And again, one that's going to give Texas a lot of fits whenever they meet in Atlanta.
We have a couple of other things to bring to you here that were said in this press conference. But first, I want to say thank you to Duck Camp. They are our sponsor for College Football Playoff Week. Again, this week, Duck Camp is made for the people that live for the moments out there where there are fish to catch, birds to hunt, time to kill, football to watch. CJ is recording this, it looks like, from a place where there may be birds to hunt. They like doing all of that stuff at Duck Camp, so they built a company centered on it, based in Austin and dedicated to giving people best-in-class hunting and fishing apparel. At Duck Camp, they believe you can't just sit around and wait for adventure to come to you. You have to get out there, stay out there, and make the most of every single second. Here's the great seasons, y'all. Yes, hunting and football. Shop hunting gear at duckcamp.com. That's duckcamp.com, our sponsor for College Football Playoff Week. Again, second week now that they've come back for this because, look, I think they're big Longhorn fans as well over there and trying to see what happens. We don't want to stop the good juju that's going on with Duck Camp right now. Hey, CJ, one of the things that I thought was interesting, Steve Sarkisian said that he highlighted Trevor Guthrie and his performance on Saturday, saying there, look, here's a guy that played left tackle at a moment's notice against A&M, then starts the next week at left tackle, and then here we go in the second quarter against Clemson, and he goes at right tackle. He said that he gave a comment and talked a little bit about Trevor's journey to the team as a whole today or this morning. And he also talked about penalties and the focus of that in this game to the team, playing a relatively clean game against Clemson, only 2 penalties allowed. What did you think of those 2 comments?
Yeah, we'll start with Gooseby because look at it. The 3 games that Texas probably had the most intensity, the most must-win in those games, Texas A&M, Georgia, Clemson. Trevor Gooseby has played all of them, right? And for the most part, about 75% of every single one of those games, right? After 7 snaps against Texas A&M, he was thrown in at left tackle. Started the game against Georgia. Early second quarter, he was thrust into the right tackle position. And it speaks to his versatility and how much he's just willing to go out and handle business for the Texas offensive line. It's a testament to Kyle Flood, his development, but also the athleticism and the knowledge of Trevor Gooseby to go out there and play both sides of the offensive line. Because, Bobby, that's not an easy thing to do for offensive linemen who don't see the field all too much. For him to come in and do that really in weeks 14, 15, and beyond, that's a tough thing to do. So tip of the cap. He was one of the guys that Sarkisian singled out this morning as well with the team before they went out for their early morning workouts and stuff at Moncrief. But moving forward, I mean, the penalties, big part of the success for the Longhorns on Saturday. You go from having 11 in Atlanta against Georgia a week ago, 11 for north of 100 yards, to just 2 for 10. He said that the team had, quote, a come to Jesus meeting at some point in the bye week leading up to the first round of the college football playoff. So, look, we play a really solid physical brand of football. Don't lose that physicality and that violence, but be smarter. Understand when to attack the quarterback. Understand when to try to hold on to your blocks a little bit longer on the stretch zones. Said even then, there was one penalty that they highlighted and brought to the team today against Clemson, and it was a personal foul, late hit on the quarterback that he said, I like the aggressiveness, but understand when to be that aggressive at the quarterback and know when you're putting your team in a tough spot. Overall, I think any coach might be able to take 2 penalties for 10 yards if it means that's what's going to happen in the college football playoff.
Yeah, absolutely. As long as your team is still being aggressive, right? And that's one of the things that Sark made sure to talk about. Another guy that came up in this discussion was Gunnar Helm. It was very interesting. Steve Sarkisian was asked about Gunnar Helm specifically, right? And he talked about how he can be a mismatch, and he's really developed a rapport with Quinn Ewers, and how they can use him and rely on him in replacement of JT Sanders from a year ago. But what I thought was personally interesting is after Sark finished talking about Gunnar Helm, Kenny Dillingham, the Arizona State coach, then went on a little bit of a screed about just how important Gunnar Helm is to that Longhorn offense.
Yeah, I'll start with Coach Dillingham's comments because probably they kind of made me laugh a little bit. He said, look, when you play tight ends, you like them to be clumsy, a little too big, just kind of fall over, and that's that after the catch. He said, yeah, that's not the case with Gunnar Helm. You know, we've seen him hurdle folks. We've seen his after-the-catch ability. He said it's going to be a big-time challenge for his linebackers and safeties to bring down Helm because of what he's been able to see so far this season with the Texas tight end. And going back to what Coach Sarkisian said about him, he said, look, it's a combination of things. One, it's the versatility for him to be able to be an inline blocker, help the Texas offensive run game, and then go out there and stretch the field vertically with that touchdown that we saw against Clemson in the high red area. That's a testament to his versatility, but also the trust that Quinn Ewers has in him. Not only did Quinn Ewers audible both of those plays to run plays for Jaden Blue to find the end zone, but he also mid-play, mid-route, had a bit of a communication, linking with Gunnar Helm to help him kind of steer back towards the post on his touchdown. That wasn't necessarily the route that was intended, but because the two have such a high level of chemistry, because they played together for 3 years, that route then turned wide open. It was a great throw, great catch, not just the familiarity of one another, and something that really is unspoken about when it comes to Gunnar Helm and his importance to this team.
Another thing that was brought up alongside those 6 players from Texas was the importance of recruiting to Arizona State in the state of Texas. They have dialed it in as one of the states they have to recruit well at. They've committed some of their resources to it from not only the portal, but also high school recruiting. Obviously, Brian Carrington, a former Texas recruiting assistant, now the cornerbacks coach, I believe, at Arizona State, Dillingham saying that Texas is important in this game, obviously, will play a role in that as well. All right, let's just recap here for everybody. If you're joining us late, first of all, Bevo, a no-go. Bevo will not be able to be on the sidelines in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium. They said they just could not get the enclosure is too small or too large to fit within the sidelines of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. So that's unfortunate. But for the second straight game in Atlanta, Bevo will be unable to attend. Another big subplot that is happening, and we talked about earlier, is the turnover margin. Texas creates a lot of turnovers. Arizona State does not give up many. Texas has created 29 this year. Arizona State's only given up 8 all year long. That's a very stingy team. They are plus 14 in the turnover margin this year, I believe, as well. All right, CJ, we have other news and notes, but we also have, by the way, the full press conference availability on Texas football's YouTube channel, as well as on our audio podcast. CJ, anything you want to end with here before we let people go?
Yeah, I thought that there were a couple of things that were still pretty interesting. Look, the Peach Bowl vice president spoke beforehand, said that I'm expecting a sellout before the end of the week next week. That's something that's really interesting in the sense that, maybe you anticipated a full sellout against Georgia. I thought it was maybe 85% full whenever Texas and Georgia met in the SEC championship game. I'll be eager to see what that turnout will be in Atlanta for this round 2 of the college football playoff matchup. On the other hand, Coach Dillingham said, what was the biggest change that he experienced going into the Big 12? He said, look, the hostility, the environments, the road games. If this Peach Bowl has any sort of pro-Texas crowd, I wonder how much of a factor that will have. But some Texas fans will like this. When asked specifically, what about those Big 12 environments that kind of stood out to him, he said, look, I've never had tortillas thrown at me in my life, Bobby. And, of course, he got to experience that in Texas Tech in Lubbock, which I am not in Lubbock, by the way. I know it looks just like it. But that's something I thought that was really funny on top of that. But this should be a good one. On top of that, I think both coaches have a great amount of respect for each other as offensive play callers. Each talked about learning from one another from afar. They've not worked together. They've not necessarily come in contact with one another too often. But there has been pieces, Sarkisian said, specifically when game planning for Washington last year for the college football semifinal, he watched the Arizona State-Washington game with a great amount of intent to learn about what just went well for Arizona State, who at the time was not as competitive as this 11-2, 10-2 team that they have currently, but sure gave Washington a handful last year. Both teams with a great deal of respect for one another at the head coaching spots.
All right, CJ, I appreciate you doing some late afternoon duty. I know you guys have the 3 o'clock winning drive, 3:30 winning drive later today with Coach Shipley and Rod Babers. For CJ Vogel, I'm Bobby Burton. Again, Bevo, a no-go. Watch for the turnover battle in this game. For CJ Vogel, I'm Bobby Burton, as well as our producer, Matt Hudson. You guys have a good afternoon. Hook 'em.